Hello, I'm Erica Thompson Young, Associate Director of Corporate Relations and Engagements for Diversity MBA. Thank you for registering for our webinar, Wellness in the New Normal. Here to deliver, we have Dr. Mary Donohue. Recognized by premiers, prime ministers, and Queen Elizabeth II and her peers, Dr. Mary has been honored as one of the 18 outstanding women in tech and named in the inaugural group of Diversity MBA's Top 100 Women of Influence. Dr. Mary's content is science-based and transcends the usual feel-good in the moment solutions because she uses classical conditioning to help you retain your burned-out brain. Her content is snackable and designed for people who need to be reminded to care for themselves, not for people who just focus on themselves. Her bite-sized burnout solutions can help you in one of three ways. Her book, Message Received, her intellectual gem, the Digital Wellness Center, and her classes for the minds that want to share. Thank you for your time this afternoon, Dr. Donohue. I will turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you very, very much, Erica. I appreciate that warm introduction, and I appreciate you allowing me to present today. I'm very grateful for that. And I'd like to welcome everybody who's attending today to this probably unusual presentation on the concept of wellness in the new normal. My guess is the majority of you probably don't understand the implication of wellness in your business as it relates to the bottom line. And that's fine, because we really haven't had a lot of time to study that. I had a lot of time to study that because I was actually someone who burned out because she kept pushing herself and trying to get that one more thing done. And what I'd like you all to consider is how much of you see or hear in that statement. How many of you are pushing extra hard right now? How many of you are just going that extra mile and working that 3 extra hours? How many of you are exhausted? Well, the first thing I'd like to share with you very quickly is that Einstein believed in relaxation. Professor Deming and Professor Tesla also believed in relaxation. See, the problem with wellness and digital exhaustion is that your mind is reacting to emotional nuances in the messages you see, receive, and react to on digital. And as crazy as that sounds, I'm going to start to explain it in terms of neuroscience. What begins to happen when you're on digital all the time is you begin to see over 115 different emails a day and 40% of those have to be answered right now. And so your brain is trying to process that. Now, in my book, Message Received, I talk about the fact that we were in meetings for 4 hours. That's doubled since COVID. So now you're spending 3 hours in messaging and 8 hours, some of us are spending on or in digital meetings. And your brain is trying to process all the information. And don't forget, you're reversed when you're on camera. So the digital social cues you're starting to see, or the behavioral cues, are reversed. So your brain is trying to make sense of that. So your language is located right here, which is in your instinctive brain. And that's where you get those quick, witty responses. And then the next thing you see is in your head, that's your mammalian brain, right over your ears. That's where your gut feelings are, your patterns are. So your instinctive brain says, hey, what's going on here? I'm looking at this, I'm trying to figure it out. Oh, I don't recognize this. Mammalian brain, hey, I need your help. And mammalian brain searches its memory banks and says, wait a minute, I don't have a pattern for this behavior. I don't know what to do. And your reptilian brain, which is at the very base of your neck, says, wait a minute, what do you mean you don't know what to do? And you begin to go in fight or flight. And your brain begins to start to work overtime. So your body and the physical manifestation of fight or flight is an increased heart rate. You could start to sweat. More than likely, you start to clench your jaw, you clench your fists, and you breathe heavy. The long-term implications of this, because we know this is happening to you over 80% of the time, because trying to figure out the patterning and messaging for your brain is very difficult. We've only been doing it since 2007 with the introduction of the smartphone. So your brain is still trying to use all of this information. That's why we look at evolutionary psychology. For millions of years, we've communicated face to face. We've communicated with each other through the written word. The Egyptians used their language. The Babylonians had their language. Then we moved on to the Romans, and we looked at the introduction of the alphabet. And in 1590, we introduced the great vowel crisis, when we introduced vowels into language. Our brains were in the similar situation, and that results in chronic anxiousness, which results in an increase of illness, which results, and we'll learn, in an increase of antidepressants, which results in low productivity, which results in one of the things we're seeing now. 7 out of every 10 employees in the next year will be leaving their job. So we can just let that settle in for a second. And while we do, I'd like you to teach you what I like to call my Einstein moment, or my brain clearing moment. Professor Einstein believed in time away. He left his blackboard, he left his books, he left everything. And every morning at 8 o'clock, he would take a bubble bath and eat 3 eggs. And then when he was at Princeton, he'd go for a walk for 45 minutes every day. Einstein realized your brain needed to clear. In psychology, we call this transient hyperfrontality, or clearing the front of the mind. That's where all your problems begin, because you're trying to figure out the language. You're trying to be quick and witty and helpful. And your brain's just saying, dude, I'm tired. I can't figure this out right now. I've got nothing. So it begins to go back into fight or flight. When you feel that happening, I'd love to give you a couple of quick exercises. We call them intellectual workouts at our intellectual gym at the Digital Wellness Center, that help you just clear your brain and bring you out of fight or flight and into freeze, which is where I hope you to be, where I want you to be for the rest of the presentation. So I'm going to ask you now to take what we call the neutral position. Place both feet on the floor. Uncross your legs and snuggle into your chair. Now, if you're able, take your hands, put them in the ground. Let's wiggle your fingers and gently put your hands on your thighs. And as you do that, take a deep breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. In through your nose, out through your mouth. And as you begin to feel a deep breath, I want you to think about, when was the last time you took a deep breath in your day? When was the last time you actually breathed in through your nose, out through your mouth? And I'd like you to gently, as you continue your breathing, ever so gently, take your chin and push it down to your chest. Don't hurt, just push it down to your chest. And as you do that, feel the tension in the back of your neck. Feel it move up through your head, through your forehead, through your nose, through your jaw. And let's begin there. As your chin is leaning towards your chest, relax your jaw. Relax your jaw, relax your cheeks, relax your eyes, relax your forehead. And as you relax your forehead, feel the stress leave the back of your neck and your shoulders. And as that stress begins to release, feel it travel all the way down to the tips of your fingers. And if you're able, create 2 fists. Hold it for the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Now shake your fingers out. Shake, shake, shake. Stretch those fingers and relax them on your thighs. And think about this. We now communicate through our fingers more than we communicate any other way. So let's relax those fingers. And as you slowly become present again, think about how our hands are now becoming part of our voice. And let's remember during the day to give them a break and shake them out and relax. We recommend with the Digital Wellness Center that you do something like that at least once a day. We have specific breaks for email, for meeting stress, for collaboration triggers. We have all of these different stress busters built in for mind clearing. And why is that important? Because today, wellness is the new normal. We have to focus on wellness because my research during COVID, I'm one of the few people that had programs in corporations during COVID, identified one big problem with wellness in the digital age. Bosses are figuratively killing women. Why is that happening, Mary? What is occurring? Well, the fact is, what I just led you through, only 3% or 3 out of every 10 people are trying right now. Only 3 out of every 10 people are practicing self-care. Over 70% of us are suffering some form of debilitating illness or manifestation of chronic anxiousness due to fight or flight. We're exhausted. We're overeating or we're undereating. We're not physically exercising. And what's beginning to happen is this is becoming our reality of normal, and it's not normal. Let me give you a few examples of what I mean by that. Bosses have experienced COVID in a very different way from their team. I'm going to share with you 2 examples from the data, and you tell me who you identify with. The first example is Martha. She's a senior director, VP level person. It depends on which company you're at and which title you have. And Martha has 3 kids. When COVID happened, her nanny was able to live in the house. The nanny took over managing the groceries, ordering food in school, like dealing with the school. Martha was able to focus on her job, and Martha's partner was able to focus on his job. Things were pretty normal except for the commute. And during commute times, it was a 45-minute commute from home or office. So Martha found she became more productive because she used that commute time to get more work done. Her children were cared for. She was fine. Her efficiency ratio was off the charts. But what she began to see and what she began to call people like me about was in the data we identified someone we'll call today Lorinda. Lorinda's a new mom. Her child is under 2. I consider that still new. And what Lorinda began to experience was a very different reality than Martha. Lorinda was suffering from the daycares being closed. Her partner was a frontline worker. So she was managing the baby at home. She was trying to jump on meetings. She was trying to clean the house. She's an admitted clean freak. She was trying to order groceries, and she was trying to keep up with the Marthas of the world because eventually she wanted to be Martha. And as this began to continue from March through April, through May, through June, now she's worrying about people coming in the house and fixing things, the doorbell ringing, hundreds of her dogs barking, having to mute yourself. And you know this experience. You mute yourself and absolutely brilliant information comes out of your mouth. And then guess what? Just like the Golden Globes, you're on mute and no one heard what you had to say. So now you're exhausted, you're frustrated because you can't really remember that exact brilliant thought that sounded so good to you. The dog's still barking, you still have to order groceries, the baby's crying, and you're trying to get everything done. What begins to happen? You begin to go into chronic anxiousness. You begin to stay in that point, and that's what happened to Lorinda. Lorinda ended up going to 3 different doctors. She had indigestion problems. She felt like she had a pain in her heart. Sometimes her heart was racing so fast it was hard for her to breathe. She started to gain weight. She just didn't feel like herself. And yet she was working more. Instead of 12 hours, she was working 14 hours. She'd try and feed the baby, and then she'd try and put the baby down, and then she'd work really, really hard. And then the baby would wake up, and then she'd put the baby to bed. And instead of going to bed herself, she was working. So she went to 3 different physicians. Each of them gave her a different medication. One of them was for sleep, one of them was an antidepressant, and the other one was for indigestion. Now, Lorinda's trying to have a second child. What are all 3 of those drugs going to do to her? And that was what she was beginning to concern herself with. And she was asking herself the question, is this really worth it? Do I want to work this hard? And ladies and gentlemen, that's why 4 women are leaving the workforce 4 times faster than men. And here's a surprise finding, men are doing the same thing. Over 64% of team members, according to Forbes, are talking about leaving their jobs this year for what they consider greener pastures. It's just not worth it. They can't keep up the pace. And unfortunately, the Marthas of the world are doing their best to understand, but because they lived a different reality, they don't understand. And it's hard to be compassionate for something you don't understand. I want you to begin to listen and look at the data on how this is going to affect your team, because my research is coming out on March 12th that talks about this. And what we know is that the average team is made up of 9 people. The average manager manages 9 people. Well, if we begin to look at 63 or 64% of those leaving, that means you'll lose 17 members in the next year. What's this going to do to your productivity? What's this going to do to your bonus? What's this going to do to your client service? Those are the questions you have to ask yourself. Now look at the fact that women are leaving the workforce 4 times faster than men. One more fact. When I interviewed CEOs for my paper that I'm presenting on the papers, that I'm presenting on March 12th with Walmart and American Airlines, what we also know is, Microsoft, not American Airlines. What we also know is that the cost of those antidepressants and the drugs we've all been taking to get through COVID are increasing our healthcare plan costs unreasonably. So by the time 2022 comes around, I know that I'm already looking at an increase of 50% in the healthcare I pay for my staff. So I don't know what it's going to be on a corporate level, but it's going to be very high. My insurance agent called me. So these are just some of the problems we're beginning to see from COVID. But what really struck me in the data was the fact that bosses are seeing the world differently than their followers. So what does this mean? How come this happened, Mary? What are you seeing in the data? Well, if you think about an ice cream cone, women have been trained to think of work-life balance as a self-care, or even self-care as a treat, like ice cream. What we found is women believe self-care or work-life balance is something you only deserve when you reach this unattainable goal. For example, like getting your to-do list done. I wrote today, sorry, I'll change that. Getting your list done today, getting all your emails answered, attending all the meetings and being mentally present for all the meetings. Well, if you're in meetings 8 hours a day and trying to answer emails on top of that, what I can tell you is your brain can only focus on one thing at a time for 2 hours. And then your brain needs a break. Einstein's brain needs a break. Einstein took 2 hours out of every day to clear his mind and look at the thoughts he came. We need to begin to help women get over this belief that work-life balance is unattainable, that they're not worthy of self-care. And the people that hire the Digital Wellness Center and the people that buy our mentoring programs are leaders that care about their employees. They're leaders that care that people are burning out. And they're also leaders that realize the value of wellness as it relates to the bottom line. And I'll actually give you some stats and figures if you want to share these with your senior leaders in your corporation. But what I want you to begin to realize is self-care isn't an ice cream cone. Self-care is something you need to do to preserve your brain. It keeps you in the whole idea of wellness. So what we discovered is what we call the sunshine effect. That's my sunshine. And there's 5 dimensions to digital wellness. There's physical wellness, emotional digital wellness, intellectual digital wellness, social wellness, and work wellness. And these dimensions were positively affected by what we call micro-learning and micro-mentoring and mentoring circles. And what we know is the physical is the very first thing we have to attack because you're exhausted. So what we talk about is giving people in the Digital Wellness Center 3 little activities like I just ran you through. We call them micro brain clearings. Sometimes we call them desktop detoxes, depending on where we are. And I developed them to clear the brain. We offered them beginning in 2018, 3 times a week for 3 minutes a day. And the results were spectacular. As soon as people began using these tiny little micro breaks and brain clearing, their stress dropped. Their stress dropped actually by 10% because they were able to take their physical body out of their work for a few minutes. Interesting fact, men use our product 6 times more than women because women think something like this is a treat, something they have to earn. And what we're finding and what we're encouraging the men in our program to do is remind women, eat the ice cream cone, eat it 3 times a day, do it, have fun. Okay, so don't eat an ice cream cone 3 times a day because I can tell you, based on experience in my family, you will gain a little weight if you eat the ice cream actually 3 times a day, but figuratively, eat the ice cream 3 times a day. And then we looked at the emotional well-being. Your brain can be in fight or flight. And when that happens, it affects your mental health, obviously your emotional health, but also your relationships. And your emotional health is affected by your ability to respond to people, your ability to respond with clarity, your ability to respond with calmness. And so what we found is with our micro lessons that go with the brain clearing, people were beginning to understand how to manage their communication. They were beginning to understand how to have new patterns in their brains. And we teach this through generational insight and neuroscience. We actually demonstrate how each generation learns and communicates differently on digital based on their experiences in school with technology. Now that makes great common sense, but no one actually ever thought of it before. Of course, we all communicate differently on technology because we use technology differently as different generations in school. You are what you learn and how you learn. In other words, you plant corn, you get corn. So what we found was, strangely enough, an increase in emotional well-being of 10%. Again, we're hearing that number of 10%. When you lower your stress, your emotional well-being goes up 10%. And then we looked at your intellectual well-being. Now I'll talk a little bit about this more. But your intellectual well-being is when you get out of fright or flight by using freeze. Most of us don't realize that when we learn, we can't be in fight or flight. So the more you learn, not only are you increasing your digital intellect, but you're reducing that chronic anxiousness. Again, that increased 10%. And then you become more social. You're in general happier. Because if you're less stressed, you're feeling better, you're learning more, guess what? You're happier. And you become more social online. You begin to be willing to talk to people. You begin to experience these fun experiences through digital. That's what we're talking about, the new normal. You begin to snuggle into that chair and take the breaks you need and have fun with it. And last but not least, what we saw was in work. When all of these things work together, you increase your productivity by 10%. And that's a pretty amazing factor. So this is what we call our sunshine effect, because it's like a little starburst into your life when you just start to take care of yourself. And so leaders, when you're here, as we go through the whole program, what I'd like you to start thinking of is your job as a leader is just like being a gardener. You need to water and you need to weed. I know that sounds a bit strange, but when you water and when you weed, you're able to grow your team in the same way that you're able to grow your bottom line, because the two are connected. And let's not pretend the two, like you don't need the two to be connected. In all corporations today, everyone has experienced change, but the one change that hasn't and won't be experienced is we still need to make money or raise money depending on what type of organizations you're in. So what as a leader can you offer your team? Well, what we ask you to do is think of everybody's day as a glass of water. When you wake up after a good night's sleep, which is one more thing that we increase in the Digital Wellness Center, our participants report getting better night's sleep and sleeping on average 1 hour more for every month they participate. I anticipate that number will go down, by the way, because it always does in the research. People overestimate how well they're sleeping in the very beginning. But what I want you to think about here is that during the day, your team, every single team member, once they get to their desk, has a full glass of water. So just like watering a garden, the soil's good, you've got everything there. But as the day goes on and the sun shines brighter and brighter, stress begins to come into play. Problem solving begins to come into play. Exhaustion begins to happen. And then you get that digital confusion and that fight or flight. Your glass slowly begins to evaporate. And by the end of the day, you don't have much left. I get it. I experienced the exact same thing. That's what happened to me. I was too stressed. I was trying to get one more thing done. I was compounding the problem by not sleeping and working late and trying to solve everybody's problems and ordering all the groceries and doing all the housework and managing everything. It got to the point that I was so burnt out, I ended up back in the oncology ward. That's not great to do to yourself, ladies and gentlemen. You need to realize, how am I going to refill my glass of water? And leaders, how do you water? How do you create that feeling of being watered for your followers? Well, you've got to replenish. You've got to put breaks into your day. You've got to build these into your day. There's a number of different ways you as leaders can do that. The very best example I can share with you is what I heard when I was collecting this research at the new president of Sam's Club. What she said to all her employees is this. This is a start. I hear people are asking you to attend meetings after 5:30. If they do, you tell me. You email me, and it's not tattletaling. No one should be working after 5:30. That's huge. What we also suggested is implement short breaks into the day. So 55 minutes, take a break. And why would you do that? Because that's how schools are created. You can even go for an hour and 20 minutes. Think of your workday as a school day if you're a leader and you want to replenish your followers. Create their day, help them structure their day. Here's an example. When you get to school, you usually work for an hour and 15 minutes, and then you get a recess. Create a recess break. Use one of our detoxes, use our brain clearings, and just do that as a team or do it as an individual, but build it into everybody's calendar. Do a JURT calendar. Then you go back to work for an hour and a half, and you get a little lunch at school. Remember, you used to get a lunch break. It was lots of fun. You'd see your friends. Well, during COVID, we've given up lunch. We run to the kitchen, and grab some food, run back to our desk, eat it at our desk. It's not the same as when we were at the office, when we could go out and get a coffee, when we could go get a lunch. So just think about those kinds of little fun breaks, because that begins to fill up your water cup. That allows you to replenish the water you're losing during the day. Now I want you to understand how to give or how to have fun breaks during team meetings, because we want to begin to really help you water your plants. So the first thing to do is give everybody on your team an old glove. Finally, we're coming to the end of winter, we hope. Grab some of those old gloves that your family's left behind and recycle them to your team members. Actually mail them to them or give them to them if you happen to be walking by their homes. And ask them, every time they begin to feel stressed, use one of Dr. Mary's. Close your eyes, put your chin on your head, roll your shoulders, and take a deep breath. Allow your hands, your tools of communication, to be as floppy as that glove. The next thing is, I love to call this respect the fridge. Most of us grew up or are currently using a fridge calendar where we schedule for everybody, where everybody's going to be, who's got homework duty, who's going to take out the garbage, who's going to do what. Do the same thing with your team. Build in those breaks. The next thing is start an end of day pals club. And what this all came from is in the data, people were feeling less human. They didn't believe that their employers even cared that they had no work-life balance. That's a sad state of affairs. So what I'm encouraging people to do is what my Uncle Jim, who my book is dedicated to with my dad, and by the way, he was a CIA agent. Yeah, so true. We just found this out just before he died. They showed us his passports. And what he used to do in his other work, where he was a stockbroker for families, is at Merrill Lynch, they would all get together at the end of the day and they would tell each other their problems. And that's all they do. And then they'd say, okay, great. Let's go home. Let's think about them. And then let's come back in the morning and see what solutions we've come up with. Well, I've changed that up a little bit. I've called it end of day pals. Create groups of 3 or 4. And I recommend if you have a team of 9 to create 3. At the end of the day, everybody send their end of day pals group 3 things you've accomplished that day. Whether it's getting the garbage out, getting a green juice, answering 3 emails, being mentally present for 1 meeting, whatever it is, you send 3 of those things for 1 month to your end of day pals. And what that does is A, it makes you feel good. It helps you realize, yes, you did get something accomplished today. But B, it shares with your friends what else you're working on. It helps them to understand how to be more human. And what we're finding with this fun practice is you begin to change up the groups and you learn a little bit more about your team and you begin to realize you're all human. And the funniest thing I ever remember is somebody said, oh my gosh, I saw someone wearing jeans and I stopped myself from saying, oh, you overachiever. So I thought that was really cute. And last but not least, whenever you're setting a meeting as a leader, ask yourself 3 questions and then ask your team these 3 questions. What is it we're meeting about? What are our solutions to this meeting? What are the costs of this meeting? And what happens if we don't implement the solutions we've suggested? And ask people to just give you 50 words on that. And as you go into the meeting, your meeting's more focused and you'll shorten your meeting. In my book, in chapter 5, I talk about how to have a great meeting. And this whole idea of meetings was thought of back in 1936, if you can believe it, by BBDO. The 3 or 4 questions actually comes from Dale Carnegie's research in the 30s as well. They were suffering in the same way we were suffering. So now, how do you weed your garden? You know, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? Well, I'm asked that all the time. How do I maintain all of these great changes that I'm starting to implement? But more important, how do I retain my brilliant millennial staff, my women, as well as my diverse leaders and emerging leaders that I want to keep on my team? Remember, 7 out of 9 people are thinking of leaving. Well, you need to get insights into your pipeline. You need quantitative data and you need benchmarking. In my book, I talk about this in chapter 6. I actually give you a free program of how to do it. But what I'd like to do with you is share how we used enterprise mentoring with our clients during COVID to achieve a retention of 86%. We have a scale that I began in my dissertation back in 2007 was when the research started, and I graduated in 2009. And what we're able to show is that mentoring positively affects career engagement, team value, team trust, and self-assessed productivity rate. And now I want you to think back to that starburst that I showed you. And the only thing we didn't measure there was the emotional well-being. But we know from the work of other psychologists in the area and the idea of evolutionary psychology that when you are engaged, when you feel value, when you feel trust, and when you're productive, you feel emotionally well. So these are just some of the great gains that we saw in terms of increases in our mentors and our mentees. And I'm running out of time and I want to get to questions. So I'll leave that slide for you. I'm happy to share this deck with you after I change today. And what we did, and what I talk about in the book, but what we do with enterprise mentoring is we take away the risk of running an ad hoc program and running an internal mentoring program. Right now, with this many employees unhappy, and you're kidding yourself if you think your employees are actually happy during COVID. What we offer is a pipeline that allows you to see from an external vendor's point of view how your employees are doing, because employees tend to be a lot more candid with us because we never share their names, we never share their positions, we never have since 2012, except for once when someone was going to harm himself. And so what we do with this is we run it for 9 months. We allow people to build a relationship either through mentoring circles or one-on-one mentoring. We measure pre, post, and during, and we also collect qualitative data. And I've also given you what we term career engagements, team value, and team trust that it measures there. And you don't need to use my mentoring program, but make sure you're using an individual's program. Make sure you're beginning to build an opportunity into digital wellness for yourselves. Now, as I begin to look at this and move forward, I'm going to start to ask you some questions, and I want to make sure I leave a lot of time for questions because usually when I do this, I have a ton of questions afterwards. But I'd love to give you some more examples from the research on what we're beginning to see with this type of approach to gardening as leadership for emotional well-being. Women, like the example of Lorinda I give you, are trying to manage it all. It is our job as leaders to help them understand how to put parameters or compartmentalize their day. That's part of being a good leader. That is your job as a leader. Your job as a leader isn't tasks. Your job as a leader also is to begin to focus on new ways of working. And one of the ways that we always recommend that people begin to focus on working is to help them understand we're no longer in the 1900s. That's when bureaucratic leadership was at its height. We measured in bonus on tasks completed. But now we have many different systems in place that don't need tasks. What we need, what everybody on this call needs, is to have people whose brains are operating at that higher level, critical thinking. And the only way that can be done, to put it simply, is to allow people to grow so that you've got to water them and you've got to make sure the weeds don't get in there, because the minute the weeds start to get into somebody's soul, they want to leave. Kendall, instead of me going much further, I believe I'm seeing some questions on here. So why don't we open it up? I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll start talking to the questions for everybody, because I see a few questions already popping up.
If you have any questions, we can you will have the opportunity to unmute yourself and ask them. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand using the GoToWebinar control panel, and I will unmute you so you can ask your question.
Kendall, while people are doing that, on the screen, you'll see that we've given everybody a free trial on the Digital Wellness Center. They could just take a picture of this, or I can send it to you and you can send it out to the webinar participants, if that helps. Okay.
Yes, please send it to me, and I will definitely send it out to our attendees.
Fantastic. Let me just go back to GoToMeeting. And are there any questions? That's so funny. I left time for questions and there's no questions.
I do have a question for myself. My question is, how would you implement August, I mean, not August, office yoga?
Office yoga. That's so fun. What we look at with office yoga is how we help the whole team have a detox as they're going in to do something. Oftentimes what we find out is when people are going into a meeting, they have a whole bunch of baggage in their head. They're not actually thinking about the meeting. The best group I've ever seen this in what I call office yoga is the idea of yoga is clearing your brain and giving it time to focus or time to relax. At Amazon, what they do is they start every meeting with the material of the meeting, and everybody gets 5 to 10 minutes to answer these questions, to read the material, and then they're prepared to answer the question. One of the fun things we do is just do a simple, quick mind clearing, and that allows people to then go into the material without the baggage of the previous emails they were trying to answer or the previous meetings they were in. So we design, depending on what type of meeting it is, a specific relaxation for the team done in a chair. And this allows people to just clear their minds, read the information, and then participate in the meeting fully.
We have a question from Caitlin Bradley. She's asked, how do I, as an informal leader, individual team member, encourage wellness for teammates?
How do I encourage wellness for teammates? What I would actually start doing is if you think about those 4 little activities I gave you, the first thing is to start helping your team members build in breaks. Share with them that you're building in a wellness break every hour and a half. You're building in 10 minutes to get up, to get a glass of water, to take a break, to do a detox or a brain clearing. Share with them what that experience is like and offer to teach them how to do it. You know, I can teach you how to do it. The basics that we start with are making sure that you sit in your chair, that both feet are flat on the ground. And one of the things is you could just tell them to roll their shoulders and drink a glass of water. That's the simplest start of the day. People aren't drinking enough water. I mean, we're talking about filling water into a glass, but the easiest thing is to actually drink some water. And the next thing is remind your friends or remind your followers to take a breath. It's amazing how quickly our jaws begin to clench or just our teeth are rubbing together when we email. Because by the end of the day, if you've been always answering emails, you seem to be answering the same questions, you seem to never get to your to-do list, you're always in a meeting, what we know is you're going to begin to clench your jaw. That's going to tighten your chest, that's going to move your shoulders forward. Even just sharing this information with other team members shifts it. Please feel free to give them a free month in the Digital Wellness Center so they can begin to experience them themselves. But I would also encourage you to use those end of day partnerships, those end of day pals. And then as you start to go into a meeting, start to focus the meeting with those questions. What are we meeting about? What's the problem? What are the possible solutions? And what happens if we don't implement those solutions? And what's the cost if we don't implement those solutions? And even if you just begin to make a shift in how you communicate at the end of the day with 3 successes, and then how you approach a meeting, instead of having to go through the same meeting all the time, ask everybody to be prepared to answer these 4 or 3 or 4 questions when you go into a meeting. Does that help?
Yes, that does help. We have another question from Carrie Bird. Um, you mentioned that teams are spending a lot of time in meetings these days, up to 8 hours, plus dealing with a lot of emails. What can leaders do to bring these numbers down without excluding valuable voices?
I don't know that we can bring those numbers down currently. Right now, email and meetings are replacing casual conversations in the hall or going for coffee with people or any of those. We all need these valuable conversations. What we do recommend is beginning to learn and identify the different body language and digital social cues that are in the communications that we receive. And that's based on generational patterns. That's a whole other webinar. But when you start to think about it, when you see an email from a boomer, it's really easy to identify the pattern in that. And you mirror that, you digitally mirror that response to allow that group to respond quicker and faster, because that's a pattern they recommend. So for example, a boomer tends to prefer a well-written email, much more in the format of a letter. When you get to a Gen Xer 1960 to 1980 roughly, what you begin to see is much more of a to-do list. You want to digitally mirror back that to-do list format. When you get to a millennial, 1980 to 2000, what we're seeing is they much more shorter, much more casual communication, respond in the same way. And when you get to Gen Z, because most of us are going to be starting to onboard Gen Zs this summer, you'll notice that they're very short emails, and they're also very well written emails. This generation is very, very much like the great generation, and use words as weapons. They're very clear, they're very concise, and they're very precise in how they use language. Does that help, Carrie?
Our next question, and if there's any more questions, please feel free to ask. Another question we have is, how do you show support for someone who seems as if they're having a rough time without being too pushy or coming across as having it all together?
That's always a tricky question. And remember, when we're talking about wellness, we're talking all of us as friends and not licensed practitioners. So when you're looking at that question and you know somebody seems to be having a time, one of the things I would do is share, hey, I've been doing this digital wellness break, I've been doing this end of day thing, and I'm really enjoying it. Would you like more information on it? The other thing that we're seeing people suggest successfully is, by the way, I've started doing more yoga or more running. I'm finding myself getting stressed. Are you stressed? Because what you're doing is taking the social stigma out of it. And we're really finding that a lot of women are reluctant to say that they're stressed because they're worried about how that's going to adversely affect their position in the company. And what they don't realize is that their actions are already indicating that they're incredibly stressed. Does that help? It's hard for me to see if that helps when I can't see people. So
Yes, that does help.
Okay.
If there's, are there any more questions? If there aren't any more questions, please feel free to ask. Okay. Well, I believe that'll be all the questions. Oh, one moment. Yes, I believe that. No, we do have another question. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay, Kendall. Don't worry.
Another question: Is there an optimal amount of time to commit to the program to see the benefits?
That is a fabulous question. My answer is yes, 3 months as you begin to see the benefits. But when you start adding on, so we also have micro courses within there. The micro courses deal with Success Together, which is how to recognize each generation on digital, and it begins to introduce the concept of digital body language and digital social cues, all the way up to a full-blown mentoring program. The full-on effects are best seen after 9 months out of the year, but the initial changes can be seen as quick as in 30 days, which is what we saw with Microsoft's sales team. That was a study we presented back in September. We saw that with their team during their last quarter, during their last year, they were trying to reach their goals. They exceeded their goals. They were 10% less stressed, and they were 10% more happier, or excuse me, they were 10% more productive. And that was within 30 days. And that was with the digital wellness center, the brain clearing, and Success Together course. My best results that I've seen are people that have been using it for a year.
Okay, thank you. Another question we have is, if you're already close to burnout, is there anything you will recommend besides the examples that you already went over?
Yes. Very first thing you need to do And this has nothing to do with work. It has nothing to do with anything. If you're able, go for a walk every day for 15 to 20 minutes. Pull an Einstein. No matter what else you do not take, like, you take a phone for safety. I mean, I take a phone for safety, but I make sure it's not on vibrate. I make sure it's not shaking. You have to move your body to reduce your stress. The next thing to do is what I call the relaxation response, particularly when you're getting burned out. This is something else I like to teach, and I'm happy to help you with it if you'd like. But what begins to happen is when you start to get into chronic anxiousness, you'll notice in your mind that all of these thoughts begin to run together, and you begin to put your impression and your feelings and what's happening on every single email you get. And so everything seems to you like it's against you, like you're never going to get caught up. You have to stop that cycle of thought, because that is not what is happening. It's not at all what is happening. It's because you're so exhausted that your perception is that is what is happening. So the first thing you have to do is say, what is the problem? And you write down what the problem is. And then you say, what is the worst case scenario? You write that down. How will I deal with the worst case scenario? What are my options? Option 1, option 2, option 3. Get it down on paper and write your fears down. That's the first part. The second part is, now that you're beginning to formulate a plan, because a plan puts you into freeze. Fight or flight is not occurring when you're writing down these questions, because you're causing yourself to think of what you're doing. The next thing to do is to practice the word stop. The next time you begin to respond to an email, or in my case, you do an eye roll at a meeting, or you take a big like a frustration out, in your mind, before any of that happens, just hit a stop trigger. Whether it's a ring you wear, a bracelet you wear, a watch you wear, just hold it and just say to yourself, stop. Shut your eyes, 30 seconds, do a quick brain clear. And what you'll begin to see is you will shift. You also, my best advice is go see your physician. Your physician will be able to look at your exhaustion, your burnout, how he terms or she terms burnout. It also has to do with your emotional state. And I've given you some descriptions on your emotional state. Most important, exercise, write, and use the stop principle. I hope that helps. That's what I had to do to make my comeback.
Yes. I think that'll be our final questions. I would like to thank you, Dr. Mary, for this presentation, and I would also like to thank everybody that joined with us. We will definitely follow up with the recording and send it to you, and also along with the free trial link if you're interested. I will turn it over to, and then I will turn it over to you. If you have any closing remarks, Dr. Mary, I'll turn it back over to you.
I wish everybody good wellness. We're at a very difficult transition in our world right now, and the only way we can deal with it is through self-care and care of others. So I wish you well, and if you have any questions, you have all my information. You can always contact me. I'm happy to help.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining this webinar. We will see you for the next one. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.